There's a brand new New York Times poll out, and what it shows is that Republicans have now jumped into a 4-point lead. The crosstabs are significantly worse for the Democrats. This is going to have a significant effect on the U.S. Senate map in particular. Right now, Real Clear Politics suggests that Republicans are probably going to net a couple of seats, which would put them in the majority. Essentially, the races right now that are hot in the Senate boil down to Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, maybe New Hampshire, maybe Colorado. But those are the big ones. And we're going to go through these state by state. But to understand what exactly is happening here, you have to understand that the chief issue is absolutely the economy. And this is what this New York Times Siena poll shows. What it shows is that 64% of likely voters believe the country is moving in the wrong direction, which means doom for the party in power, especially if it's a unified party in power controlling the House, the Senate, and the presidency. This poll shows that just 39% somewhat or strongly approve of Joe Biden, as opposed to 58% who say they somewhat disapprove or strongly disapprove of Joe Biden. Those are terrible numbers for the president of the United States. In fact, they are lower numbers than President Trump currently has. Trump currently has a 43% approval rating, 53% unfavorable rating. It is worth noting here, when it comes to the exact issues that are supposedly on the radar of voters, likely voters, 26% say the economy is their number one issue. 18% say inflation or the cost of living is their number one issue. No other issue here, with the exception of just the state of democracy, ranks above 8%. So that means 44% of voters say that their top issues are issues that cut in favor of Republicans. 44%. Again, abortion is a 5% issue. Immigration is a 5% issue. Crime is a 3% issue in terms of what is your top issue. The state of democracy is an 8% issue. As we'll see, however, the state of democracy is too vague, because when you actually look at the partisan breakdown in terms of what people think they are talking about when they say the state of democracy, very wide discrepancy between what Republicans believe they are talking about and what Democrats believe they are talking about. And again, these numbers are fairly consistent in terms of the economy across the party ID. So 35% of Republicans say the economy is their top issue. 26% of independents say it's their top issue. 17% of Democrats say it is their top issue. Inflation or the cost of living, 23% of Republicans say top issue. Independents, 14%. Democrats, 17%. 8% of Democrats say abortion. 7% of independents say abortion. 12% of Republicans say immigration. So it's really kind of, for Republicans, their second issue is immigration. For Democrats, their second issue is abortion. And then when you go down to the state of democracy, what you see is that 11% of Democrats say that this is their main issue, meaning slightly above abortion, actually, so abortion comes in number 3. 9% of Democrats, and 9% of independents, and 4% of Republicans. Now, what's really fascinating about this poll is what it shows is actually fairly broad spectrum agreement on a fair number of issues that demonstrate the difference between the online reality and the real world. And this is important because candidates who tend to cater to the online reality are going to suffer in the polls. And we're going to see this when you go state by state. The candidates who tend to be very online are the ones who are doing worse. The ones who tend to be out there hobnobbing with the actual voters and trying to cater to actual human beings, those are the ones who are doing better. The reason I say this is because if you look at this poll, they asked some interesting questions. They said, thinking about the people you meet, do you think other people's political views tell you a lot about whether someone is a good person, a little about whether someone is a good person, or don't tell you anything about whether someone is a good person? And what they found is only 14% of people said that someone's political views told you a lot about whether someone's a good person. 35% said it told you a little, and 39% said it didn't tell you anything at all. And those numbers are really, really consistent between Republicans and Democrats, actually. 19% of Democrats say that politics tells you a lot about whether somebody is a good person. Only 19%, less than 1 in 5, Democrats. 15% of Republicans, 8% of independents think it tells you a lot about a person, what their politics are, whether they are a good person or not. Only 20% of likely voters say that they've had disagreements recently with family or friends over political issues that hurt the relationship. And again, these numbers are fairly consistent. That's 23% of Democrats, 16% of Republicans, 20% of independents. The vast majority of Americans are happy to have conversations with their family and friends, even if they differ on politics. There's also broad spectrum agreement that the government mainly works to benefit powerful elites. Now, one of the things that's shocking here, actually, this is actually a shocking question. When you look at the party breakdown, 75% of Republicans believe the government is there to benefit powerful elites. 69% of independents say the same thing. Only 58% of Democrats agree. So Democrats are not in line with independents here. And when it comes to whether the president should follow existing rules, there's actually a fairly consistent level of agreement between Republicans and Democrats that the president shouldn't just violate the law willy-nilly. So if you have a very online president who's just willing to, say, relieve student loan debt, without any further discussion about the legality of that, that actually is not something that's going to be wildly popular with any element of the political spectrum. As far as the question that the media have really pumped up about whether America's political system is on the verge of bankruptcy, whether wide-scale violence is going to break out, apparently about 46% of likely voters say that the American political system can still address the nation's problems. 48% say it's too divided politically to solve its problems. Now, the reality is that most of the nation's problems are not solvable politically. Most of them are going to happen socially, in your community, in your family. But again, very consistent numbers here. 46% of Democrats, 46% of Republicans, 47% of independents believe that the government can still address the nation's problems, as opposed to 45% of Democrats, 49% of Republicans, 51% of independents who believe that we are now too divided politically to solve America's problems. As far as whether American democracy is currently under threat, again, very consistent numbers. Most Americans believe that American democracy is currently under threat. They just believe that based on varying sources of the threat. Democrats here say presumably Donald Trump is the biggest threat. Republicans say that the biggest threat is Democrats. So not a giant shock right there. But what this really shows is that when you get beyond President Trump, there actually is fairly broad-scale agreement that the government is not supposed to overstep its boundaries, that the government is not capable of solving all of our problems, that the major threats to democracy are basically about our inability to get along. By the way, 54% of independents believe that the media is a major threat to our democracy. 85% of Republicans agree. Only 34% of Democrats think the same. I will say that even among Democrats, 67% say that the mainstream media is either a major or a minor threat to democracy, which is kind of astonishing. So, what does all of this mean? Well, what it really means when it comes down to the election is that the economy is everything. And the reason the economy is everything right now is because the economy is about to go into recession if it's not already in recession. According to Bloomberg, a U.S. recession is effectively certain in the next 12 months in new Bloomberg economics model projections, a blow to President Joe Biden's economic messaging ahead of the November midterms. The latest recession probability models by Bloomberg economists Anna Wong and Eliza Winger forecast a higher recession probability across all time frames, with the 12-month estimate of a downturn by October 23 hitting 100%. That is up 65% for the comparable period in the previous update. The model is more certain of a recession than other forecasts. A separate Bloomberg survey of 42 economists predicts the probability of recession over the next 12 months is now 60%, up from 50% a month early. Now, remember a couple of months ago, a majority of economists were saying, probably there won't be a recession. I was saying, nope, there definitely is going to be a recession. Now the models are beginning to match what I was telling you about. According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. is forecast to enter a recession in the coming 12 months as the Federal Reserve battles to bring down persistently high inflation, the economy contracts, and employers cut jobs in response, according to the Wall Street Journal's latest survey of economists. On average, economists put the probability of recession in the next 12 months at 63%. Their forecasts for 2023 are increasingly gloomy. Economists now expect gross domestic product to contract in the first 2 quarters of the year, a downgrade from the last quarterly survey where they penciled in mild growth. On average, the economists now predict GDP will contract at a 0.2% annual rate in the first quarter of 2023 and shrink 0.1% in the second quarter. In July's survey, they expected a 0.8% growth rate in the first quarter and a 1% growth rate in the second. So that is a that is a significant shift. You're talking about a shift of a full percentage point here in both the growth rate in the first quarter and the growth rate in the second quarter. Those are big numbers. Employers are expected to respond to lower growth and weaker profits by cutting jobs in the second and third quarters. Economists believe non-farm payrolls will decline by 34,000 a month on average in the second quarter, 38,000 in the third quarter. According to the last survey, they expected employers to add about 65,000 jobs a month in those 2 quarters. Again, the inability here of the Federal Reserve to achieve a soft landing after jacking up the amount of money in the economy by injecting $7 trillion into the economy and placing the interest rates at zero. Now that you have to ramp up those interest rates spectacularly, it would be a shock if there weren't some sort of crash right here. But meanwhile, Joe Biden is trying to happy talk his way through this with a mouthful of ice cream. Here was the president over the last couple of days. I'm not sure that Republicans could have cut a better ad than Joe Biden with his mouth full of ice cream, mumbling to people that our economy is strong as hell, in his words.
Just one more economic one. Are you concerned about the strength of the dollar right now?
I'm not concerned about the strength of the dollar. I'm concerned about the rest of the world. Does that make sense?
Can you explain that?
Yes. Our economy is strong as hell. The internal thing. Inflation is worldwide. It's worse off everywhere else than it is in the United States. So the problem is the lack of economic growth and sound policy in other countries, not so much ours. And that's how it's worldwide inflation. That's consequential.
And now he's going to pretend he sees somebody. Or does he? No one knows. So the man is eating ice cream and telling you about how the economy is great. That is almost literally a let them eat cake moment there from Joe Biden. Let them eat Rocky Road, says Joe Biden. So strong stuff there from the president of the United States. I wonder why Democrats are sinking in the polls. Meanwhile, Karine Jean-Pierre, the wildly untalented press secretary, she says, she was asked about the Inflation Reduction Act. Like, we were promised that it was going to reduce inflation at some point in here. Got any plans for it to do that at all? Here's Karine Jean-Pierre's response.
On inflation, can you give us a timeline? You've laid out eloquently what the president's been doing. Is there a timeline for when Americans can start feeling some economic pain relief?
So in regards to the Inflation Reduction Act, early next year, they will see some of the pieces of that. When you think about an energy cost, when you think about the Medicare kind of benefits from that, so we'll see some movement on that early next year.
Are you convinced? Do you feel convinced by Karine Jean-Pierre right there? She seems well in control of her talking points about the strength of the American economy. No wonder that while Democrats are slightly favored to win the U.S. Senate in 538, those odds are dropping fairly dramatically. Just a couple of weeks ago, those numbers were closer to 80% the Democrats were going to take the Senate. Now they're about 64% to take the Senate. Those numbers are going to keep coming down. And the reason they're going to keep coming down is because, again, voters are now in the late stages shifting toward the economy, which is always what happens. All right, we've reached the end of today's show. We'll be back here with much, much more tomorrow. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.